Meeting will now come to order. Thank you for joining us here in person as well as online. My name is Michael Perez, Deputy Chief Diversity Officer with the Governor's Office, chairing the meeting. And we will start with a roll call.
And other than those in the room, we have Cameron Bruce and Joseph Powell online as well. And I've got the list.
Okay. So are we okay to proceed with the adoption of the agenda? Okay. I'll put a motion to adopt the agenda. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any against? Passes. We'll now adopt the quarter 4 2023 meeting minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes. We will now move to the subcommittee overview, number 4.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. I guess I'll stand for this. So I'm going to run through items, let's see, 4 through 6, I think, in our agenda, talking about the reminders about what we're here doing with the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, this subcommittee's work, go through some of the business, talk about some of the updates from our outreach and engagement efforts for this plan, and then in terms of new business, we're going to start discussing today recommendations for future planning, and then have some time for open discussion if there's any other items the subcommittee would like to cover. Those on the line, Joseph and Cameron, can you hear us okay? Just want to make sure.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great, wonderful. And Jill has also joined us. Okay. All right, so just a reminder about what we're working on with the coastal plan update. So phase 2 is due in December of this year. That's our timeline for delivery. This is an update of our phase 1 plan released in 2021. This plan is designed to be a place-specific or a resource for mitigating severe and repetitive flooding in coastal Virginia. So with this update, we're looking at incorporating all major flood hazards, including precipitation-driven flooding, doing an update to our comprehensive risk assessment, including critical human, natural, and built infrastructure, and then working on updating our list of all of the projects and initiatives that have been identified throughout the coastal region for implementation. The elements of the plan include the exposure model, the kind of hazard itself, then the hazard impact assessment. So what are the assets that flooding is impacting in the landscape, our planned resilience actions, so that's those projects and initiatives, financial needs for flood resilience that the funding subcommittee is helping us to identify, and then task subcommittee recommendations. Each of the 4 subcommittees will be developing recommendations over the next meetings. So in terms of this subcommittee's objectives, you all are helping us by informing and supporting outreach engagement for this plan. So engaging key stakeholders is a really important part of this process, as well as engaging the general public. So you all are here to help us with that, as well as to help strengthen relationships with some of those key stakeholders who may not be as engaged, but we've identified as important to include in the planning process. And then, of course, also, as I mentioned, you'll be helping develop recommendations for future planning. So our schedule, this is our 3rd subcommittee meeting. We have 3 more to go after this before the plan is published. This meeting will be focusing on getting your feedback on where we're at with the outreach and engagement strategy implementation that we've been discussing for the past couple of meetings. And then also, as I mentioned, starting to talk about those recommendations. In terms of general updates on where we're at with the planning process, I wanted to share that we do have a signed contract for Dewberry's work on this plan. They're working on updating our flood hazard data, conducting the impact assessment using that updated data, and then also have helped us with doing a summary of our end user survey, which I'll talk about in just a couple of minutes, and then helping us to design updates to our Web Explorer, our online application to share information about the plan. We are also scoping out a contract, a task order under our resilience planning and consulting contract, which we're in the process of selecting consultants to support us with these services. So that new contract or contracts will include the following bullets on the right-hand side of the screen, helping us with that planned resilience actions or projects and initiatives analysis, including assistance to our end users to actually go through the process of submitting project information, helping to develop financial tools and information, conducting public outreach, stakeholder engagement, helping us with the final report development, and then actually making the updates to the Web Explorer. So as I mentioned, we're in the process of selecting those consultants. We're hoping to have an update, I think, for the full TAC meeting, if not the next subcommittee meeting on the status of that work. Okay, any questions on the overview before I get into some updates on how outreach and engagement is going? Nothing on them. Okay. All right, so just some reminders in terms of our outreach and engagement strategy for this plan. We do have 4 goals for outreach and engagement: understanding how our end users intend to use the plan, contextualizing information about flood impacts, not just with our kind of quantitative analysis of where we think it is likely to flood today and in the future, but also the lived experiences of what those flood impacts are felt in the communities. Contextualizing our contents about interventions to address flood risk. So this is really that plan's resilience actions or the projects and initiatives, information collection, and then driving awareness of and empowering whole community action toward coastal flood resilience. So goal number 4 is really focused on outreach. And all of these different outreach and engagement goals are designed to help us craft our products. So you can see those different products I was describing in the Coastal Resilience Master Plan outlined here within the cycle of the overall planning process and our outreach and engagement. So for outreach specifically, we do have some further kind of drill down into that outreach goal, which is we want to be able to share information about the existence, purpose, and contents of this plan, how stakeholders can engage in our engagement activities throughout the planning process. And then specifically for our outreach to underserved communities, we want to provide information that can help them advocate on behalf of decisions to build flood resilience in their communities. So we've been thinking about our outreach and engagement goals in terms of this IAP2 or International Association of Public Participation spectrum for public participation, which you can see here. So including both engagement and outreach in different levels of participation and collaboration in the process for different stakeholders. So since our last meeting, we've been working on communicating the outreach and engagement strategy to the public. So one thing that we did was put out a newsletter to share information about what folks could expect in the first half of this year. So you can see here, there's a few bullets there, including the TAC meetings, workshops and trainings with local governments and tribal governments, and community meetings or those underserved community meetings. We also updated our website, so that's what's on the right-hand side of the screen. Again, trying to communicate out what we're planning and how folks can get engaged in this process. One thing we did, as you'll see, is not include groupings of stakeholders into stakeholder level 1 or level 2 or A and B for our communications to the public, rather using this kind of tiered approach to collaborative advice and decision making, guiding input from end users and key stakeholders, and then public participation. So trying to outline the different ways in which different stakeholders can get involved without grouping stakeholders into one or another tier, which we have been doing in the strategy. And that was basically the law in the full stack. Okay, so this slide is an overview of all of our different activities within the outreach and engagement strategy. You'll see there's a status update. I'm going to talk through this chart a little bit and then move into giving updates on these items that are highlighted in yellow. So starting at the top, Coastal Resilience TAC. Obviously, we're meeting with you all now. We're meeting with the TAC quarterly. We'll continue to do so. We do have some of our primary plan end users and partners on the TAC, and this is one of our most collaborative and most important means of engagement for this plan. NGO coordination meetings we host monthly. These are really focused on collaborating with our non-governmental partners that are also doing outreach and engagement for flood resilience in Virginia. And so we're continuing to meet with them monthly with nonprofits and other partners to help drive awareness and really encourage engagement in our outreach processes. The Critical Infrastructure Working Group is being led by BDM, and we do have an update that the kickoff meeting for that working group is going to be scheduled for the end of this month. So we are planning to attend that meeting, which the key stakeholders there are critical infrastructure owners and managers. So what we're hoping to get out of that collaboration is really understanding more about our end users' needs, specifically in the critical infrastructure space. As I mentioned, we are looking at flood impacts on critical infrastructure, so we want to be sure that we're producing things that are useful and relevant for that stakeholder community. We also want to make sure that we are learning from that critical infrastructure working group about their perspectives on what is considered critical infrastructure and what asset data should be authoritative for conducting that assessment. So we're looking forward to that meeting. We're planning to share out anything that we learn with the TAC at our next meetings. The end user survey number 4, I'll talk about in more detail in the slide. It is complete. We did complete it in January of this year. So you all should have a breakout of the results for that summary. So you can take a look at those, and we'll also talk about this a bit. The participatory mapping tool. So this is currently in development. We're partnering with our floodplain management team at DCR to develop a new online mapping tool that will allow anybody to go in and identify a location where it has flooded and provide us some details about what the impacts of flooding were for them. So this will be housed in a Survey 123 application. I'll talk more about this in a minute as well. So the purpose of this is really to help us contextualize, as I said, what are the lived experiences with flooding, not just through our modeling, but how are people experiencing it already on the ground. Locality meetings, we have been discussing hosting these locality meetings with various PDCs. For example, with George Washington, we're going to have a meeting, I think, next week to talk to emergency managers, share a little bit more information about the plan. The goal here is really to have kind of a dialogue with our local government and users to understand, well, I guess firstly to share information about what it is we're producing and make them aware of the fact that this plan update is coming and how it might be beneficial to them, but also to get their feedback on all of the other goals. So, you know, how they are impacted by flooding, how they're addressing flooding, and so forth. So more information on that to come. We are planning to conclude this by May. Resilience user portal and data call. So I'll talk about this extensively in the coming slides, so I won't focus on it now. Tribal engagement meetings. Again, we'll talk about this in the next slides, but basically we have been starting discussions with tribal governments about how we can do kind of a similar engagement with them as to what is planned for local governments. And then underserved community meetings also under development, planning to conclude these by August of this year. So here we're really focusing on the outreach components, and I mentioned that specific outreach strategy of trying to empower communities with information to advocate on behalf of decisions that will benefit resilience in their communities. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. So for the remainder of these items 10 through 14, the virtual public meetings and beyond, here we have not yet started on working through these processes, so I'm not going to talk about them in detail. They're all planned for August or later, and are really opportunities for outreach and engagement in the process, primarily outreach though. And I wanted to highlight, we have added the private sector meeting, number 11, number 12, federal facility owners meeting, and number 13, PDC interviews since I last presented to the subcommittee. And the purpose there is really to fill gaps in areas where we had identified key stakeholders, particularly with private sector and federal facility owners, make sure that we had an opportunity to touch base with them, share information about what we were producing, and get any feedback on the plan. So those are, we're thinking kind of a workshop style meeting, either in person or virtually, depending on preferences, likely in the early fall or late summer. So the next slides to come, I'm going to talk about these different 4 through 9 in detail. Before I go there, are there any questions or comments on any of these other items that I'm not going to talk about?
Yeah, this is Joe Howell with the Navy. I had a question.
Sure. Go.
Yeah, so you know, I'm not necessarily plugged in real time when some of these products get rolled out. Is there an opportunity for myself to be copied on communications, maybe with the PDC, the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, so that we can stay engaged, or at a minimum, share some of this information with some of our, Navy SMEs leadership about some of these engagement items. Just so, I'm not saying that we'd always get takers, but maybe an opportunity to invite some of the folks who are at the table with some of the flooding concerns at Navy installations.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. We can think about how to better include you in some of those communications and updates that are going on. So, yeah. Okay. All right, so I think you all are aware that we did conduct this end user survey to gather feedback on primarily the phase 1 plan, how it's been used and received by our primary intended end users since it was released in 2021, and also some of the barriers and opportunities related to funding and finance for flood resilience. We had 41 responses from our intended end users. You can see the breakdown here. There's also a list of who actually responded in the summary report towards that. We did have respondents from all 8 of the coastal planning district commissions. We had 1 tribal government respond, and we had 6 state agencies respond to the survey. In terms of the local government responses, we had at least 1 local government responding from every planning district commission except for Crater. So this map in blue is the coastal resilience master planning area. The hatched black is counties or cities that responded, and then it's hard to see, but there are some towns that also responded that are in this pink color here. How we went about soliciting participation in the survey was primarily through emails and presentations. We found that it was helpful to do personal follow-up where possible, send personalized emails to folks specifically requesting their engagement. But if we had had additional resources and time, calling and doing some interviews would also help to get more responses. I think we had folks say that they wanted to respond, but just didn't necessarily have the time. Some of the key takeaways from this survey. So overwhelmingly, people thought that the phase 1 products were useful. Of those, the Web Explorer was the most used and the open data download for the least used. Historically, the products have been utilized for a wide variety of use cases. However, most people that were responding, they had an option to indicate either they've used them in the past or they plan to use them in the future. And a lot more people said that they would use the products in the future than said that they had used the products for our use cases previously. Our respondents are overwhelmingly interested in funding flood resilience with federal or state grants and are generally not really considering other forms of flooding as indicated by their responses to the survey. And then they also see a lot of clear opportunities for the Commonwealth to support flood resilience and particularly funding and financing with flood resilience needs. So we asked questions about, as I mentioned, how the products have been or can be used. So I've underlined the most popular use cases here of the different products. Generally, these align with what we kind of expected. We did conduct sort of a similar survey back during phase 1, and a lot of the responses about how people have used or plan to use the products are in line with the question we asked about what do you think is going to be useful out of this plan that we asked before the phase 1 plan actually came out. So that's things like prioritizing and funding projects, building awareness and motivating action, coordinating leadership to implement the state plan of action, developing a needs assessment and data to use in resilience efforts, and then providing guidance for appropriate adaptation options. So on the right, we have had questions about how does the state use the plan, particularly from the project prioritization subcommittee. So I wanted to be sure to answer that question and pull out some of the key responses here. So from the responses we got from state agencies, the ways that they have used the plan are primarily public education and awareness, program or operational decisions, and then research. And for localities and planning district commissions, kind of similar responses, but also for localized plan development and grant seeking. In terms of which products have been used, as I mentioned, the Web Explorer is most used, open data downloads are least used, and you can see the breakdown of different types of respondents here. And then I wanted to also share how we're planning to use the feedback that we've received from the survey. So pulling it out here, some of the ways that we plan on incorporating what we've learned from the survey. I think a lot of the outputs from the survey are helpful for helping us to better craft our actual phase 2 products. So how we put together the analysis, the narrative, the format of those different products for phase 2, both the PDF plan, but also the Web Explorer, and then potentially also other supplementary products that come with it. I think these takeaways are also really useful for all of the tax subcommittees to consider in making their recommendations, which is part of why I provided you with the printout today. We'd love for you to take a look at this before our next meeting when we start getting into the recommendations in more detail to think about how some of what we've heard in this survey can help to craft the recommendations that you all are making. And this is especially relevant for the funding subcommittee, but I think is also relevant for the others as well. We also want to use the responses to help us refine our approach to sharing the final products, particularly for open data downloads. So as we see here, that was the least used product among people who use the products. So we want to make sure that information about how to access the open data and how it can be leveraged is clear and is shared appropriately with our intended end users. And then lastly, messaging the benefits of the plan is also something we can help refine with these responses. Any questions or feedback on the subcommittee or on the end user survey from the subcommittee?
Do you have any questions?
No questions online.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned, it would be great for everybody to take a quick peek at that summary before our next meeting so that you all can consider it as we get into the recommendations. Okay, now I'm going to go through the other items that were listed out in that table overview, starting with the VFRS Flood Story app. So this is that participatory mapping tool. We're kind of in the final stages of development before it goes live. As I mentioned, we are collaborating with the floodplain management team to develop this tool. It will be in the survey 123 app format, which is, I think, pretty intuitive. You can do it from a phone or from a web browser. And it will allow us to collect information like date of flooding, description of that flooding event, the type of flooding that occurred. So whether that's coastal, precipitation driven, etc. Frequency of flooding, how often does it flood in this location? Is it flooding here monthly? Is it flooding here maybe once a decade? We've never seen it flood here before. What the impacts of flooding look like. So how did it actually impact the respondents' life, whether that's getting from point A to point B, transportation or access, or it impacted their property, etc. And then there'll also be an option to upload photos. So I didn't have a good image at the time I put together these slides of what our app will look like. This is an example of a similar app that DC developed that we're kind of using as somewhat of a model for what this tool will look like. All of the entries that we collect will be reviewed by staff before they're posted online. And we're currently thinking about, I'm going to walk through with you, Barry, how to consider tying our responses that are received for the coastal region to the Web Explorer and whether there's a way to kind of integrate those two products. So that's an update on the Flood Story app. Hopefully this will be launched next month, and then we'll be working on coming up with kind of the messaging and outreach to share it with the public. This is a public facing tool, so it is going to be accessible to any member of the public who wants to share this information. As we go out to those underserved community meetings, we'll be sharing information about this tool and making folks aware of it there, and would welcome others to also help us promote it and welcome the subcommittee's recommendations for how to promote it.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, maybe I've been blanking here, but when was this decided that we were gonna do a participant mapping? Because I don't remember, or maybe I'm blanking on that.
It was in the outreach and engagement strategy that was presented at the last few meetings. It's one of many activities,
Yeah.
so lost maybe in the
Yeah, the
number of other.
I like the idea. I'm curious, how does it tie in with other participant mapping tools that, like the one that Wetland Watch does?
Yeah.
And then also, what is the rollout strategy to get it adopted widely? Because I could see it being a great effort and a great tool that just no one ever uses.
Yeah, so for the latter question, I'll start with that. We're still working on developing that and
Mhm.
are gonna be relying on her to help us really build that out, I think. They're coming on board in the next month and a half or so, and then hopefully we'll have a good strategy. So it's within their plan scope to help us develop that, the rollout for this. Former question about integration with other tools. So we know, yeah, there are other similar tools that exist out here for Virginia that are already collecting some of this information. This would be, it wouldn't directly pull in any of that data, but we could certainly in the plan itself acknowledge that this is only one of several apps that's out there for participatory mapping, and try to reference some of those other mapping processes that have occurred, whether it's Wetlands Watch or some localities have done this also for their own work. That's still something I think we're working on the details of, but interested in not just showing this as the only tool in the plan, but saying, you know, there's various other tools that have been collecting this information as well. This tool is developed to be statewide, so it will be eventually rolled out to the whole Commonwealth and is designed to live on our floodplain management team's VFRIS application. So I think as we look ahead to not just to planning for the coastal region, but the statewide plan and potentially future regional master plans, the idea would be that this is also a tool that we would be leveraging for outreach for those plans and continuing to promote over the years.
I can also see it being a really cool way, if it was widely adopted enough, to kind of fact check how the progress is going, right? Especially I'm thinking like VDOT's resilience plan. I see a lot of people who have problems with flooding on roads that would be like,
Yeah.
well, if I report the road flooding, then people will fix it,
Yes.
which is in theory a good idea. But you know, that could be a cool way to kind of fact check how we're doing in terms of hazard mitigation plans, flood resilience plans, and you know, resilience plans in general.
Yeah, agree. And so, I mean, in my previous work, we used a similar reporting tool in our locality to measure progress towards our resilience goals, how much flooding was being experienced. And there's always challenges with that because flooding, you know, flooding is going to get worse. So, yeah, but yes, I agree. Mary Carson, you have your hand raised.
Hey everybody. I love this and think it will be so helpful. I wonder if there would be an opportunity for inclusion of other data sources. So for example, as mentioned, the phone app that we have allows for people to indicate hotspots. And while that hotspot entry could include a photo, it may not include the entry bullets here that are on the slide. However, that data has been collected and is in a database and could certainly be useful. I'm thinking also about the flood sensors and the way that they're collecting data and then feeding that data to Waze. And so we know that there are similar hotspot intersections and sections of roadways that are impassable. And so that's data that is there and available and vetted. And similarly, the local government kind of 411 calls, you know, we've worked with local governments and Carolyn, your old local government to make sure that we can get that information as a part of some of our neighborhood resilience planning work in our collaboratory. So if there was an option to allow for some of that existing work to be inputted, although not perfect in the way that you might want to receive entries, it would give us an opportunity to see all of that information across one platform. And we've been pushing people to VFRIS and want it to be the go-to, you know, flood mapping space in terms of, you know, parcels and structures and things like that. So if it's possible, it would really help everybody, I think.
Thank you. That's helpful. I think we can think about, yeah, what sort of opportunities, because it's, I mean, it's all a lot of people are collecting this information already in ArcGIS Online, and like that's how it's being displayed. So you could theoretically integrate those different tools into one sort of web app or layer that's then being shared in different ways. So I think we can.
Yeah, I think we can look at trying to pull them all in and show that in one map that
Yeah.
might be separate. Whether we can get it done by December of this year is a question,
Right.
but if we can't, that can also be a recommendation from the subcommittee that there should be a push for the state to combine and show all that at once. We know we're kind of, other people were doing this in different spots. We're trying to make this is a statewide tool, and it's similar to other efforts where other communities might be more forward leading than DCR. We also have a lot of communities that don't have anything. And so with this statewide resource, it's really helping give them this opportunity and this tool without having to develop it on their own. And we do see a need that this can also, the information that we collect goes back to the communities. They have access to the data, so they can incorporate it in their local plans as well. So I think we'll try our best to see what we can do in this schedule and time frame that we have. But there are opportunities and that can be strengthened by a subcommittee's recommendation to help us move forward beyond December of this year.
Okay. Gonna move on now to our locality meetings. So as I mentioned, we've been in discussions with the planning district commissions about how to best share information about what we're doing with localities. We have identified some localities that we want to kind of host more targeted engagement with, and then others we're kind of generally doing presentations generally through kind of standing meetings or standing groupings of localities to help mostly share information about what's being done with the Coastal Resilience Master Plan Phase 2, and then kind of an opportunity for questions on the process and the products. So on the left-hand side, with all of the planning district commissions and all of the localities, we've been talking about how to host meetings, and these are specifically for staff. I want to make that clarification. We're meeting here with local government staff, or in the case of the Appomattox Northampton Planning District Commission, there we will be presenting with elected officials. So this is to share information about tools and upcoming activities and ways for staff and elected officials to get involved. On the workshop side, again, meetings with staff, trying to get into more detail about what those products are, some of the more conversation and back and forth about some of the challenges and opportunities in those locations. And this we discussed, I think, at our last meeting, how to identify which localities would be targeted for this kind of higher level of engagement. And we ended up using criteria of having relatively high flood risk from any flood source, but also relatively low phase 1 engagement. And based on those two components, we pulled out a few localities within HRPDC, all of the localities within Greater PDC, and then 2 within San RBA, so Chesapeake and City of Richmond. So we've been discussing with those planning district commissions how to go about hosting or co-hosting those meetings with the PDCs. Timeline for this will be kind of the April-May timeframe. So those are coming up. We're working next on kind of identifying locations, agendas, details, all of that to be able to host those meetings.
On the presentation portion, I know there was only one tribe that responded, and we have all kinds of stuff that we're dealing with small staffs, but most of the tribes in Virginia are on or near rivers, or like us, we're between 2 rivers. Chickahominy is between 2 rivers. Chickahominy is. So I know that they are concerned about flooding issues all there. So we have, with our work with EPA, Region 3, RTOC, so Regional Tribal Operations Committee that meets monthly. So that might be a good way to actually get to the people as opposed to the chiefs that deal with everything. You know, we all have environmental directors that, you know, on the route and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So if we could do that, and that kind of hits both with the presentation and engagement, and you'll probably get a higher engagement level from them, you know, with that information.
Yeah, and I'll talk about tribal engagement. That was the next slide. We actually did present at our talk last week. So I was going to share some takeaways from that before we get there, and that's a great comments, and I would love to discuss that further. Are there any other comments or questions on this?
Well, there may be a way to be more efficient with James City County and Pocosin as the core starts the kickoff of the peninsula study, because we're gonna have to do scoping meetings with all of those localities anyway, and instead of bombarding the local staff, because there's gonna be all kinds of problems that are gonna come into that scoping meeting, and only part of it will be covered by the federal plan.
Sure.
And then there's an opportunity to, all right, take these other issues out and figure out how can the state assist?
I think that's a great suggestion. Love to hear more about timeline for when that meeting is likely to occur and how it aligns with our schedule, since I know we are on a tighter schedule than I think reported for that study. But if we could.
Scoping meeting is gonna have to be complete probably by August.
Okay, I think it is possible then to potentially coordinate on those, so we can follow up with you and the team over at the core on that. I think that's a great suggestion.
Broader Hampton Roads Planning Commission, because it'll encompass City, Hampton, Newport News, Pocosin, and James City County. So we'll have everything on the peninsula.
Great. Yeah, we were already thinking, particularly for Hampton Roads, it would be ideal to perhaps not do one meeting for these 4 localities, which are in very different parts of the region. So, yeah.
Any more questions? Okay.
Okay, so tribal engagement. So we did present to that RTAC meeting on February 12th last week. We explored the following topics that you see on the screen here. So where we're at with the update of this plan. We specifically requested input on how tribal lands and resources were represented in our impact assessment. So for phase 1, what we included was data available from the Census Bureau about the location of tribally owned lands and structures. And that's what we ran the impact assessment on for tribal participation in the plan. However, we recognize that that was insufficient, and that ideally we would have better data and more complete data that was lacking. So we asked for feedback on that. We also asked if additional engagement opportunities would be of interest to the tribe. So all of the federally recognized tribes are invited to participate and sit on the TAC as members. And so we have obviously participation from some of the tribes. Cameron is also on the line, but others have not engaged in this current phase 2 update to date. So we thought, are there other opportunities that would be of interest to meet through meetings or workshop or interviews? And so we asked the question, if so, what format would be best? We recognize that, there are a lot of limitations on capacity and time to meet, and a lot of other demands on the tribal government's time. So we are still looking for opportunities to partner with others who are also engaging with the tribes around flood resilience to see if there's a way to collaborate and, again, not duplicate efforts. So we're currently in discussions with Molly Mitchell over at BIMS. She, I think, is planning to host a meeting with both state and federally recognized tribes next month. I know she's still working on scheduling that, but has invited us to come to that meeting to, again, share a little bit more information and open up the space for dialogue on some of these questions, particularly for the impact assessment. We are on a pretty tight timeline for deciding what we're including in that impact assessment in terms of asset level data. So if there is something that tribes do want to include, we need to know that, I think, by the end of March timeline to be able to incorporate that into the impact assessment. So there are other opportunities for, of course, for tribal engagement in the planning process. So it wouldn't need to be limited to that question. We could have additional meetings after that to talk about other ways that tribes could be represented in the plan and their perspectives could be represented in the plan. But we do want to offer that opportunity for feedback before we hit that deadline for doing the impact assessment.
And some of the, I guess, the unique things, and my tribe is a whole lot more forward than others in environmental space.
Yeah.
My environmental director, for about $10.5 million in grants the last 2 years. So she's got a hard charge, and some of the other tribes are focused on other areas. But one of the things, and discuss some early parts of the attack, was we talk about like infrastructure and all, we're talking about like buildings and things like that. But that's not all for us. Infrastructure is cultural sites. And things of that nature, other resources, what's the impacts on the rivers, what's the impacts on our fishing, and things of that nature. So looking at just where the tribes on land is a smaller focus, like for us, just watershed issues, we go all the way up into the next region. So anything that's just a big watershed, we are concerned on that, what goes in, what work is being done and all, because it impacts the fisheries. So that's one of the things, and I might have to help some kind of teasing that out from some of the other tribes. Because a lot of times they look, smaller, like, okay, this is where our buildings are, we'll have flood issues there. But what are the other, impacts in the area? We have 2 properties right now that are getting hit pretty bad. We had 2 rainstorms, no major thing, with it. And our one newest property, it blew out a culvert. I mean, it twisted the 3 concrete culverts carved out of the area about half the size of this room. And that was just one rainstorm that lasted a while. So we have impacts of properties, but then there's the other impacts as well. But and the tribes do have a lot on their hands, but they will engage. Sometimes, it's a little hit or miss depending on schedules. I didn't know about with the meeting, but I'm our alternate or RTOC, but I've only been to 2 meetings in the last year because it always conflicts with other meetings of mine. So Lee pretty much runs that.
Yes, and she was there and did provide feedback to us, saying that the Census Bureau data, for example, for the impact assessment is not sufficient. Exactly what you just said, that she's looking at watershed, that the tribe is looking at the watershed scale for impacts and is interested in impacts much broader than what's owned. So I think that gets to the point of we want feedback not just on what's labeled as tribal impacts, but also, in the natural infrastructure element of the impact assessment, how we can best design that impact assessment to represent and reflect, the needs of impacts that tribes would like to see in the plan as well. So we'll hopefully have a further update on this for our next subcommittee meeting. If there's any additional ideas about other ways that we can partner with others to have these further conversations with tribes, this would certainly be welcome. Okay. So the next activity within our outreach and engagement strategy I wanted to touch on are the underserved community meetings. So again, the purpose of these meetings is to provide outreach to make folks aware of the existence, purpose, and contents of the Phase 2 plan, opportunities to participate in engagement activities during the planning process, and then also to provide information which can support those communities to advocate on behalf of decisions that will build their own flood response. So what we're really hoping to do as much as possible, really for advocacy towards achieving those goals, is to meet with community-based organizations or CBOs that are serving or representing underserved communities with an interest in flood resilience. So we know that it's really hard to get communities to come out to meetings. It's hard if you're even a local government to do this. So the state coming in and trying to both identify and promote and help folks see the relevance of this to their livelihoods is going to be really difficult without having a counterpart organization that's already kind of touch base for that community. So we do want to partner wherever possible. In terms of how we're defining underserved communities, this is the definition that we're using on the screen here. This is from the Community Flood Preparedness Fund manual, but it's also consistent with federal definitions for underserved communities that are currently being used. And we are, as we continue this work, planning to work with our consultants to help both identify underserved communities at risk of flooding, and then make touch points with those community-based organizations that want to meet with us in this process. The timeline for these meetings is this summer, so June, I think completing the meetings by August of this year. We have already had some contact with a couple of organizations who have reached out to us with interest, and we think that, moving forward is going to be a combination of soliciting interest from organizations that want us to come out and present, as well as us doing some proactive identification through mapping and other kind of word of mouth, engaging with you all, et cetera. So what's shown on the map on the right is census blocks that have a high ranking based on the the CDC's social vulnerability index. This is what is used in the community flood preparedness fund as a measure of where to prioritize the location of funding. And then this on the right is a picture of what we accomplished in phase one in terms of crosswalking coastal hazards, and the impacts of coastal hazards with social vulnerability. So those areas that are more red are those areas that have the combination of both flood hazard exposure and social vulnerability. So these are a couple of starting points for tools that we're sharing with our consultants as we try to advance this work on both of these splits, but are open to other recommendations for how to do this work. And then also we are working on updating this this mapping product and how we're showing coastal hazards and social vulnerability together through our impact assessment in the phase 2 plan. So that's something we're working with Dewberry on right now, and expanding the hazard beyond just coastal flooding to also encompass other forms of flooding and all flooding sources that we're looking at with phase 2. Any questions on the underserved community meetings before we move on, or recommendations?
I think this could be very effective for the course goal. So each October, we're looking for at least one underserved community to submit a request to do the continuing authorities project package. It's 100% federally funded. So a lot of the challenges for these communities is that they don't have the cost share to do a federal project. And so this current pilot program, I think, is a good way, as long as we can find the right project within the scope. It's got to be, you know, less than a $10 million project.
Sure.
And so it's, you know, we can't go everywhere, but I think if we partner together and we found the right project to submit from the Norfolk district here, then it would be, you know, a way to help.
Absolutely. I think that would be great where you all have interest and capacity to join us at some of these meetings. We're also thinking about how to involve local governments where, you know, where we are going to meet with a community, we do want to collaborate with, you know, others who are working on flood resilience in that space. And so inviting local governments to also participate and share information, but also having the core speak to what is available and what opportunities might exist to help address some of the challenges that arise would be really helpful. So I think that's great. And if you aren't able to, then we can share information and provide that to you. And
yeah, I think we're trying to find the right local sponsor.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I think that's a great idea, in part because I think we've talked in the past about outreach fatigue.
Yeah.
And I think with a lot of the underserved communities, they get a lot of requests for information from them. And it's a lot easier to be able to bring them to the table if you can offer something in return. And I know that DCR and your guys' office is not able to offer funds or commit anything at this point in time, but if you can find other federal or state partners or even local partners who have like money they're trying to spend or work they're trying to do, where they can say, hey, here's something that we can tangibly help you with. It's a really good pairing, I think.
I agree. Yeah, and we heard that feedback loud and clear at our last subcommittee meeting. That was brought up as, you know, we should, wherever possible, try not to do these meetings alone and just ask for input without connecting it to action or connecting in the local government. One thing we did do since our last meeting is attend a workshop out on the Eastern Shore that was hosted by UVA and their climate equity projects. So we were able to share information and also, you know, hear from folks that were coming out to participate in that planning effort where UVA is providing research and developing this data list for the Eastern Shore and be a part of that bigger conversation. And I thought that was successful. It was a great opportunity for us, and it sounds like UVA was also appreciative of our presence. So if you all are aware of any other opportunities like that for us to collaborate with existing efforts, that particular activity came out of our last subcommittee meeting. So if there's anything that you hear of where you think that's great opportunity for collaboration on this topic, we would be interested in identifying those and asking to appreciate those recommendations. Okay, I have a few slides here on the resilience user portal and data call. So this is that collection of information about projects and initiatives for us to be able to do our plan resilience actions analysis in the phase 2 plan. So the purpose here is really to develop that comprehensive inventory of flood resilience activities in the coastal region. And that is something that has been put into code that we have to do with this plan, but we also know that it's something that folks are looking for, is more information about what's already going on, who's doing what in the coastal region, to support collaboration, but also to help identify where there are gaps where we know there's a hazard and there's not something going on to try to address it. So what we've done so far to build this inventory is back in 2021, during the initial development of the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, we had a data call where we collected information primarily from planning district commissions and localities. We're also some other organizations that submitted information and included that in our Web Explorer inventory for the phase 1 plan. Also pulled out some examples of projects and things to include in the phase 1 plan report itself. In August of this past year, we had a second kind of bulk upload process where we asked each of the PDCs to help us to submit updated information about projects and initiatives from their localities and from themselves. And 6 of the 8 planning district commissions participated in that, and we're just in discussions with the others about additional updates they might like to make. The next month in September, we launched our user portal. So this is a new tool that allows folks to go in and edit and update any projects and initiatives that are already in the inventory directly. So you can go in and change details or add a new project or initiative, and then that goes for DCR to review before ultimately getting into the Web Explorer inventory directly. So that allows for updates really anytime, whenever localities or others have an update they'd like to make, they can do that. We currently only have 11 registered users of that user portal, are working hard right now on trying to get more folks into the user portal and in general to get this information from other stakeholders who may not have already participated in providing information about their projects and initiatives. So how are we doing that? Or sorry, let me talk first about the benefits. So why would somebody want to participate in this inventory? What we've heard and what we're working on is promoting this inventory as something that folks should want to participate in, despite the fact that it does not directly connect them with funding opportunities at this time. So some of the benefits that we've identified are that this inventory will help us to take account of Virginia's flood resilience financial needs, trends, and gaps. So identifying at the state scale, really what is the financial need in this region? Where are there gaps and opportunities that can be addressed through action? Supporting regional knowledge sharing and collaboration. So, there's other efforts across the state led by universities or led by other state agencies to try to fill some of these challenges. And so this can help us to better share information about what's already going on and take advantage of those existing opportunities to leverage existing work for mutual benefit. Showcasing organizational flood resilience priorities and accomplishments. This really for localities, I think, is a selling point where you can have a means and a format of getting your projects and initiatives into an adopted state plan. That may assist with funding applications for grant funding. For example, if you're applying to a federal funding opportunity, you can say, hey, my project is in the Coastal Resilience Master Plan. Providing automatic matching of projects with funding opportunities. So the user portal and the Coastal Resilience Web Explorer do connect information about projects and initiatives that are submitted with information about funding opportunities that are also in the portal. So if we have a grant opportunity or loan in the portal that can be identified as based on different factors of analysis as being relevant for a project or initiative, it can tell a locality or a state agency or a planning district commission, this could be a good fit for you to pursue funding. And then of course, we are also satisfying code requirements by developing an up-to-date inventory. So our projects and initiatives right now are largely localities, planning district commissions that we have information from. We have very little information on state agency projects and initiatives, and we have very little information about tribal projects and initiatives. We do have some others. I think these are mostly non-governmental partners. We have, I think, a couple of federal projects, but very few federal projects as well. We have a total of 660 actions, so projects or initiatives in the Web Explorer right now. This is the breakdown between the two. And importantly, no changes have been made to the original batch of projects and initiatives that were uploaded to it in 2021. So we know that there are some instances where there's duplicative information in there, and also some stuff that just we think local governments, planning descriptions, others will want to update since it's been a few years. The right, you can see the map of the number of projects broken down by geographic area, locality, and then also planning district commission. So here we have a lot, maybe unsurprisingly, we have a lot of data from Hampton Roads, but this region hasn't updated their data since 2021. So that update is definitely needed. For some of the more rural areas, we can see that a lot of the work to develop and submit projects is being done at the PDC level as opposed to at the locality level, which is the opposite case in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. And then we also have gaps in coverage where we know that we don't have coastal flood issues, but we also have gaps in areas where we know that there are coastal flood issues. So there's just generally gaps that need to be filled. Part of that we think is messaging of this Web Explorer is not just projects that address coastal hazards, but projects that address all forms of flooding, particularly for those areas that do not currently have a lot of projects and also don't have a coastal flood hazard or a strong coastal flood hazard. And then in terms of dollar value, this is what we've got in the Web Explorer right now. I want to caveat all of this by saying that we are missing a lot of cost information just across the board, but also point out that some projects and initiatives are significantly more complex and costly than others. So whereas when we looked at the numbers, the Middle Peninsula had very few projects and initiatives, that's because they have one very large project and one very large initiative totaling more than $1 billion. And you can also see the breakdown of costs by type of owner up right. So we know that one of the first things we need to do in updating this inventory is providing some assistance to, one, identify areas where we do have data gaps, for example, with the cost information that we were just looking at, and then actually getting in touch with some of the owners, so those state agencies, planning commissions, local governments, to fill those data gaps. We do have an April 1st deadline to get that information in if folks are submitting it directly to the user portal. So again, there is that option to go in and update the information directly themselves. Their option also exists to ask us for help updating it. So April 1st is the deadline either to submit the information or request this. Then we know we need further analysis of these submissions and outlining of what this actual what we're going to pull out for the report itself. So how are we going to analyze this information in the plan? And how do we need to improve the information that we have in order to present that analysis in the plan? That's coming up in April. And then looking ahead through May to September, we'll be working on that content development. Firstly, cleaning data and filling data gaps, then figuring out what the products themselves look like, including through that Coastal Resilience Web Explorer mockup and the final report summary. So we are very much looking forward to having a contractor on board to assist us with this. We are currently collecting requests for assistance. We already have some of those come in from planning district commissions that we've spoken to in the past couple of months. So we do have a kind of a running list of requests that we're going to provide to our contractor as soon as they're on board to start helping with this work.
Carolyn, maybe this is a question for my other PDC colleagues, which are not in the subcommittee, but I'm curious the feedback you got from them about trying to put forward initiatives and projects, and who, when you talk about owner, for my local governments at least, there is sometimes a discrepancy between what the locality staff wants and what the board is willing to say, this we will approve. And so for the localities, most of my locality staff would not say, let's put this in a state plan without putting it before my board first. So they're not going to come up, unless it's already in another plan that their board has approved, they're not going to come up with a plan and say, here's what we want.
Mhm.
It's just, especially if it's going to a state plan, and your point to, you know, this could help with prioritization of funding sources in future. Did you have that problem at any other PDC?
I don't think it was brought up, that particular concern was brought up. I think most planning district commissions are thinking about incorporating projects that have already been identified in another plan, adoption
Yeah.
plan.
And maybe that's just our problem, is we don't have as many plans as the other.
I mean, I do think that is the case, for example, for Northern Neck, for example, they have a hazard mitigation plan that's adopted, but not very many resilience plans that would have this type of project or initiative.
Yeah, we don't have a resilience plan in any of our localities or PDC, so.
I can certainly,
But we'll see what the hazard mitigation team comes up with on Monday.
and that's something we can ask for the PDC too.
Jill Berry had a comment, it said a small comment, please include Accomack County in the color coding on the maps. It shows projects on, I'm assuming Eastern Shore. We're all in Northampton County, but should be both. The projects were submitted Eastern Shore wide.
Yeah, so for this one, here, where projects. Let me step back for a second. Projects are organized by who the owner is. So in this case, there's a lot of projects that are showing up as owned by the PDC. So you can see they have 47 projects that are region-wide. The ones that are showing up only for the counties are ones that were submitted by the county directly. So that hatched area with the number in the bubble is the number of projects or initiatives that are region-wide and would cover both counties.
Right, but it looks like on the map, it just is Northampton County. Accomack is north. Like, it looks like there's zero
Right.
projects and initiatives in Accomack County, and it's the Accomack Northampton Planning District Commission. So it's a little misleading if people were to think that everything's happening in the southern part of the Eastern Shore in Northampton County.
Okay, yeah, we can think about how to present this in the final plan. This is by no means something that will be, this is something I created and not something that will be in the final plan. So, yeah, we can think about how to present that regional information where you've got a PDC with 47 projects, for example, AMPDC, or George Washington, where you've got a PDC with 25 projects and none of the localities with their
You
own
can't see
projects.
City of Fredericksburg, which does have one behind it.
Yeah. Thank you for the feedback.
Thank you.
And Meredith, to your point about what staff may think is a need versus what's approved from the jurisdiction. That's part of the reason we have the approval form for the user portal. And so that we're not just getting,
What one person thinks.
correct. But we can help try to drive to close those gaps. That's what the gap analysis can highlight. Where do we have flooding? Where do we have impacts from that flooding? Is anything going on? And if not, a staff might have an idea to help close that gap, and maybe that can help start the ball rolling in that area by highlighting where those gaps are.
Well, I think part of the problem you'll run into in certain jurisdictions is it's a political issue at that point, right? Is there might be, what the data shows is a flooding issue, and how we address that flooding issue is a political issue. It's a priorities question.
Yeah.
And so, you know, our PDC board or our jurisdictional board might say, you know, this is not a priority enough to be put in a plan, because we don't want to actually get funding towards it until we've addressed affordable housing or child food security or whatever the other priority is, right? And so they might not put that as something that they would put in a plan, even though it's something that is identified as a need in a data sense.
Right. And I think that's also where we're trying to get some more storytelling
Yeah.
with our impacts, trying to tell stories that will try to move the decision makers. So that's where we're trying to see what's important to the PDCs as kind of the end user. A lot of our end users, people that will implement actual projects, are localities by and large. So how do we influence them? And that's part of our underserved community outreach, our tribal nations outreach, is how do we share their perspective, not just the perspective of an individual neighborhood, but the perspective of a larger community. And how do we elevate that message and that perspective so that as decision makers see this information, see this plan, they understand that perspective, they should be seeking it out on the more local specifics of how we can work towards solutions.
I think alluvial modeling will help a lot for
Yeah.
my region, because we don't consider ourselves coastal, even though the fall line falls right through us. But yeah, so, it will help to see some more data too.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's everything I have with the outreach and engagement strategy updates. I did just want to open it up for any final comments or recommendations from the subcommittee or discussion. I think there's been some good feedback already that we will certainly work with and follow up on in the coming months. I wanted to bring back this table in case it was helpful for referencing the whole suite of activities that we have going on before this plan will be released later this year. Any other comments, discussion?
No.
All right. So on to new business. I wanted to talk a little bit about recommendations for future planning and mostly set the stage for next meeting and then have time for open subcommittee discussion before public comment. So firstly, bringing back some of the recommendations from phase one. We haven't looked at these as a subcommittee before. I wanted to share them again, and also I printed out some of the recommendations with a handout and provided them in a handout prior to this meeting. So would encourage you all to look at these and read through them before our next meeting where we'll talk about subcommittee recommendations in more detail. But some of the things that we heard from the phase one TAC, the outreach and engagement subcommittee, was to further integrate the data collection efforts with the outreach meetings, to be specific about requests for data and stated goals of meetings, to find out where gaps in input are in part of those communities or community-based organizations, and then to use more varied outreach and robust outreach strategies to promote information about this plan, the press, media, and social media. Additionally, these were some additional recommendations that were received from the subcommittee. You know, at this time, the outreach subcommittee wanted to be more engaged in helping define the direction of the overall outreach and engagement strategy for the plan, and saw PDCs as a kind of useful conduit for conducting outreach. So I hope we've tried to be responsive to a lot of this feedback in our developing the outreach and engagement strategy for this phase two plan and in these updates to you all. Of course, we're always open to feedback on how successful we're being in that at any time, but also wanted to share them as kind of setting up, thinking about what recommendations this subcommittee would like to make in the phase two plan. So we've talked about at least one already, potentially creating that kind of holistic map of participatory mapping tools for flood resilience across the region. So that's one potential recommendation we've already talked about at this meeting. But moving ahead to our next meetings, we are going to have our new consultant present here at our next meeting to help facilitate this discussion about what this subcommittee's recommendation should be. So we hope that it'll be a really interactive, engaging kind of workshop environment where you all can really share your ideas about what we should do better moving forward. And I think as a good starting point, we can start to think about our strengths and weaknesses, opportunities that can serve as a basis for those recommendations. I also wanted to just bring back some of the original subcommittee objectives that we looked at the top and that we talked about in our first meeting as kind of a basis. There are some sub-bullets under that, develop recommendations about ways in which the subcommittee might take those recommendations in the final plan. So things like plan uptake, how to support the use of the planning products, continued coordination, outreach and engagement, and education. Once the plan is finished, how are we continuing that sustained outreach, and then understanding stakeholders, and perhaps documenting some of the lessons learned from phase two outreach and engagement. So thinking about how this next meeting might be structured, you know, a SWOT analysis is a traditional classic way to think about starting point for recommendations, some questions about, you know, what's working well with outreach and engagement as it is, what can be improved, what resources can we use to improve, and then what changes or factors might influence future success. rather than trying to brainstorm responses to these questions today, I wanted to open it up for discussion and feedback about what the subcommittee feels it might need in terms of additional resources to help answer these questions at the next meeting. So is there any analysis, documents, information that we should either bring to the meeting or share with you all in advance to help you answer these questions about what's going well, what's not going well, etc. I would appreciate feedback on that now if you have it, or to follow up with me prior to our next meeting so we can share that type of information with you all. Any thoughts on that?
I wonder, excuse me, this is Mary Carson. There's been so much going on in the outreach space with the NGO community in the updates that have occurred regularly. I wonder if a comprehensive overview of what's being done so far would be helpful to fill in, to identify gaps or opportunities for us as a working group.
So not just things that we as CCR Office of Resilience Planning are doing, but the broader community of folks doing outreach engagement for flood resilience.
Yeah, I think that would be good so that we know kind of where our place could be, so that whatever we're recommending isn't duplicative or just not needed because there's work occurring elsewhere. It might also help us know what kind of strength or weaknesses we have in partners to help supplement the work that the state's doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can work on collecting that information.
Thank you.
I wonder if we could also maybe think about plans that already exist. I'm thinking almost a little bit of the RAFT model of how they kind of do an analysis of plans. And I know you guys have been looking into a lot of the plans that already exist. And I looked ahead at the homework and know that one of the recommendations was to look closer at hazard mitigation plans for the state and for the localities, I'm sure as well. And having worked in hazard mitigation stuff, I think that there is quite a bit of overlap. So I wonder if maybe, not that it could potentially pull out all of the recommendations for every hazard mitigation plan, that'd be a lot, but to do an overview, some kind of graphical illustration of what plans exist that might be relevant to this work, that we can pull strategies from and data from and other thoughts from as well, perspectives.
Yeah. I think from our side, I'm hopeful that we'll have more information about the approach to identifying underserved communities at flood risk that we can also share at the next meeting for as kind of a point of discussion, kind of getting to that gaps of where those communities are and hopefully start to talk about where there might be gaps in outreach that's already occurring.
Yeah, I don't know if the only one I can think of that's severe flooding, of course, is Palm.
Mm-hmm.
And they're, doing some living shoreline work and other things there. I think they've even had drone work done, scanning there to see the low-lying areas, but they're the combination of water rising and their land sinking.
Mm-hmm.
That's hitting them pretty hard. Anytime there's a super high tide, full moon, then it's 100 yards up into their property.
Yes, as we learn more and engage further, hopefully with the tribes, we can also share some of the status of that work with the group for the next meeting. Anything else that might be helpful for this conversation?
I wonder if having like a map of the communities that have received CFPF or FEMA hazard mitigation assistance, grant assistance, would be helpful, because I feel like if a community has raised their hand and has enough capacity to access resources, whether their CFPF, which requires a little bit less capacity, or FEMA, which requires way more capacity. This would show our group where communities might be most willing to work with us from an outreach and engagement standpoint. So that will signal that local governments are keen on this issue and would likely answer a phone call or an email requesting engagement, but also that the neighborhoods and communities within the locality could be more willing to also participate and engage. Because I think, you know, it's much easier to get to the local government staff, and it's, you know, exponentially more difficult to get to the community and the neighborhood level. But it's unusual that there would be community and neighborhood level engagement in a space where the local government isn't engaged. And, you know, I could be wrong about that, but that's the trend that we've seen in our work.
Yeah, so mapping out recipients of state CFPF and federal funds.
Yep.
Carol Glover put in the chat that DCR has developed a map of CFPF awardees.
Yeah, so I think we all already have something internally to share on that side, and then can maybe work with VDEM on adding information about federal FEMA funding.
Yeah, and the Virginia Conservation Network also has a map that I'll include in the chat. But we don't really have, at least I haven't seen a map that shows CFPF as well as FEMA hazard mitigation support. And, you know, HUD is offering some support in this space too. And so it's really not just a FEMA game any longer. It's still prevailing FEMA, but we could open it a little bit more to flood risk funding. Probably just in the public sector, it might be a little bit more difficult to do private. But that'd be a great resource.
I think to Mary Carson's earlier point about like having maps of, you know, who we've engaged already. I think there was a map in a maybe our first subcommittee meeting of who you guys plan to have outreach with. If we could almost update that and say, because I know that was one of our first tasks was, you know, who should we add to this list? If we could almost update that and have these are who we've engaged, these are who we still have to engage, these are who never answered our calls, you know? Yeah. And kind of like, where is the gap there?
So that not the geographic map, but the stakeholder map?
Yeah, like our chart really is more of what I'm thinking.
Yes,
so
definitely.
A diagram of sorts.
Yeah, that we could do that. Absolutely. And then I just want to add, you know, for our next meeting, I would also, you all can make recommendations for invited guests. If you would like to invite somebody else to participate or think that it's valuable for the subcommittee to consider, you can share that information with Michael and with myself for any recommendations for invited guests if you think there's others that would help this conversation. Okay. Well, that was all really great feedback, and we will work through those items in advance of our next meeting and work to hopefully send that out in advance of the meeting so you can take a look at it before we actually come together for the workshop. We will have at least half of 3 meetings to talk about recommendations for future planning. So this will be the first of those 3. We look forward to having some good discussion on developing those recommendations. Are there any other topics that the subcommittee would like to discuss before we move to public comment?
No, nothing online.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone seeking to provide public comment online?
You also be able to indicate so in the chat or by raising your hand, and then we'll open up the microphone.
Okay.
Going once, twice, on.
If you're having trouble and want to indicate, you can do so before we adjourn. Just raise your hand or put it in the chat In terms of action items or scheduling, so we got a lot of feedback. We'll pull out those action items from the minutes as we type those up about what to provide for the next meeting, and also some opportunities for coordination as we move forward with the outreach and engagement strategy. Our next full TAC meeting is going to be on March 13th in the afternoon, so it's 1 to 4 p.m. here in the Patrick Henry building. So hopefully you can all make that meeting. We this should say, yeah, quarter to our next subcommittee meeting. So we will talk about additional updates on how the outreach and engagement is going, review some of the resources you all have requested, and then work on recommendations for future planning. Very hopeful that we will have a consultant here to facilitate that discussion and introduce you to them. So we'll look forward to that. And then prior to that meeting, please take a look at the phase 1 recommendations handout, as well as the end user survey results to help guide some of the discussion on recommendations. That is all I've got.
All right, any motions from the subcommittee members before we adjourn? Is there a second to adjourn? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. This meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.